Hey there guys, this is Flamzeron, aka YouTube's Tosuke. This game's been out for a while and I've been kind of casually playing it off and on while trying to juggle other stuff, but I've talked about it on my podcast, so I feel like I can talk about it here. I guess that's sort of like a rule of thumb for me. Like, I have to wait until I talk about games that I've been playing on my podcast before I can talk about it on my YouTube channel. And now that I have, for the special 10th anniversary of Mizuho, which I'll get to later on, so be sure to stick to the end for that, or you can just skip if you want to, I don't care. This is also the 10th anniversary of Tales of Symphonia, which is definitely a milestone for the Tales series, but with that, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Tales of Symphonia Chronicles, or Tales of Symphonia Unisonic Pack in Japan, but we got it in English as Chronicles. And it was announced pretty early, too. Like, I was a little surprised. At first, I thought it was a joke, but we got it. And this is the first HD port of a Tales game. It's on the PS3. And I'll just go ahead and say, I haven't finished the game. I'm still working on Symphonia 1. I'm at Palma Costa, or whatever you want to say. But I'm mainly going to focus on Symphonia 1 because I feel like that's where most of the changes really matter with Dawn of the New World. Well, I'll get to that later on, but I'm mainly only focusing on Symphonia 1. I will touch on Symphonia 2 though. But anyway, why don't we get started with this bad boy? Obviously, with this being an HD re-release, people are going to want to know the first thing people will notice will be the graphics, and they use the PS2 assets, which I'll go ahead and say I find a little strange. I feel like I don't know why they didn't just use the GameCube graphic assets. I know that it would have been difficult to convert everything over, but I feel like for just something as simple as graphics, the transfer and the conversion wouldn't be that difficult. I don't know about how long it would take. Maybe they thought it would take too long, but just to convert over the GameCube assets to PS2 assets shouldn't be that difficult. Not to mention, they could just do, since it's on PS3, obviously PS3 is more powerful than both a GameCube and a PS2, so they could have made some sort of hybrid thing, but with the graphics, it's from the PS2 version, so there's a low poly count, and also since it's a PS2 port, the frame rates at 30. From what I understand, the GameCube version of Symphonia was at 60 frames per second, and the PS2 version, while it's supposed to be at at 30 seconds, it kind of fluctuated between 10 or 20 and whatnot. So it kind of fluctuated between there. But from what I can tell and from what I can understand, Symphonia Chronicles is at a constant 30 frames per second. So you're not going to really notice too much, I feel, when you play this. If you go from the GameCube version, or even the PS2 version, to this version, Chronicles. But with the graphics themselves, I feel like, they did definitely upscale and fix up the graphics, even if it was the PS2 version, so they look a little nicer. But I feel like they only, upscaled and, updated the graphics and models for the player characters, and I'm going to assume some major characters. Like I said, I'm only at Palma Costa, so Lloyd and the gang, they're all updated and whatnot. They kind of have a bit of an anime look to them, which I find kind of interesting and kind of funny, since this game has anime art. But it's definitely not the best looking of the graphics, but obviously since this is their first time, it's going to be a little rough anyway, so I feel like we shouldn't get too upset over the graphics. The main thing with the graphics that I noticed, that there was some clipping issues. I don't know if it was for other people, but for mine, when Cross would sheathe his sword in the end battles, his hand would go through the sword, and I imagine that would hurt. Same with Lloyd, and Colette's her shirt or her dress or whatever, it starts to kind of cave into her tummy. So it looks kind of silly. So there's definitely some clipping issues going on, and whenever I run with Lloyd, because I'm playing as Lloyd right now, as you'll probably see, his little white ribbon tie thing, his little capes, they kind of clip into his arms a little bit. So there's definitely some clipping issues. I guess that's the big issue with this whole project, is there's a lot of it's more like a final rough draft than a final draft. It seems a little rough around the edges. new voiced content. Obviously, with this being the PS2 version, there's some new content. People have uploaded a lot of it, like, the new arts, and of course, obviously, the Mystic arts that now everyone has. They changed Lloyd's so where he doesn't say Falcon Crest at the end. It's like, I'll show you. Ha! He doesn't say, like, Falcon's Crest. But, the one thing that people have been continuously noting about the new voice clips is that, they got the original voice actors back. So I will say, for Symphonia 1, they got the original voice actors back to do the new lines. You can definitely tell that there's some age on him, in particular with Kratos, his voice is, like, really low. But with the new voices themselves, they sound a little quieter, and the audio sounds better. If you listen to Symphonia, just the voices on their own, I'm going to try if I can replicate it. It kind of sounds like they're closer to the mic, I think. Like, it has more of, like, a radio sound to it, but you can also hear, like, a bunch of, like, it doesn't sound, like, crystal clear, in my opinion. But with the new voices, it's pretty clear they're using newer mics. I don't know, maybe they all recorded at home or something, or maybe they didn't optimize it. Maybe they didn't do what I did and level all my audio. Because I know my voice audio is generally pretty quiet. But, so I think the main issue why it's so quiet is because it's, one, not optimized to go along with the rest of the audio, be it with, like, filters and just not right volume, but also because since they're using newer equipment and potentially better equipment, that it just sounds quieter just on the grounds that it's better quality and not optimized. For the actors themselves, like, Lloyd sounds basically the same because, let's be honest, Scott Menville, he always sounds like he's like 14. He's been doing that voice for so long. Plus, he started doing Robin again in Teen Titans Go, so he's probably getting more used to doing the voice. Kratos, his voice sounds lower, and it's kind of funny because when they have him do Shining Bind, it sounds like they took also the clip from Radiant 1 where it says Shining Bind. And it's kind of funny because it's all like, you've got like these what sounds like 3 different recordings sessions. Like, it's like, hoo-ha, eat this. Then he does his mystic art, Chains of Divinity. Then he does his art, Shining Bind. It's like, good lord. I kind of wish they'd use the Vesperia version, because that version sounds so cool. It's like struggle against these holy chains, Shining Bind. It sounds so cool. I might actually listen to that when I get done recording this. But Genus sounds the same from. Well, of course they didn't. I don't think they did any new dialogue. And with Lloyd, Genus, and Colette, since they had already done their Mystic Arts, or they already had their Mystic Arts in the GameCube version, they don't really sound that different. Zealous sounds a little more aggressive and more angry when he does Shining Bind, or excuse me, Luminous Bind. I'll get to the translation in a bit, but I got a few things to say about that. But sounds more aggressive. Rain sounds kind of funny because she's I don't want to say melodramatic, but she sounds more dramatic, and I feel like one of the lines that she gives basically expresses one of my main issues with I feel like I finally understand why the dialogue in Symphonia sounds so weird to me, and I'll get to that in a second. But with Fairy, she sounds like she's trying to put more power into her recordings, which I guess that's one of the issues with getting a cast back to do like a 10-year-old game, because there's going to be some differences. I kind of wish they had done more work with the voices and like try to optimize them or whatnot. And the line I'm talking about is like, spirits cleanse us of our sins. She has like a little orgasm there. When I feel like that kind of represents like the dialogue of Symphonia as a whole. But Presea, she sounds roughly the same. It sounds kind of closer to Timmy Turner though, and maybe even a little Twilight Sparkle. I guess just because she's more used to doing those voices. I mean, you can still hear the Presea voice, and Regal, it's basically the same. He's Regal. I feel like he's got more of like the growly kind of thing that he's mostly known for. Like,
I'm Crispin Freeman. I'm a voice teacher.
you know, he's actually a voice teacher, by the way. Mythos is probably the worst out of the bunch. I'm sorry to say. They got his voice actress back. It's a female, and that's one of the big points. Like his voice actress, who I believe was also a Kid Goku in Final Bout, and the English dub of that, because they got different voices from the Funimation cast. But she does Shining Bind, but it sounds like a female. Like it just sounds like a girl doing a Shining Bind. And I understand that now with girls voicing guys, there's more of a with voicing children, there's like a new standard. Like, you don't want to sound too like scratchy and littly and whiny. It's more like you're just trying to match like the emotion and the energy, which I feel like is a bit of which isn't necessarily a good thing, because they stop sounding like children anymore, and they start sounding more like weird young adults. I feel like more people have a better skill at it than others. I don't know, but so yeah, that's what I think about the new voices. Unfortunately, the skits were not voiced, but that's okay for something I'll get into later on. I understand budget, but I feel like at the same time, if they have the actors, I feel like it would have just been so much easier just to dub the and that's one thing I kind of hope. Like, if they had dubbed the skits, I would be playing it in English, because, spoiler alert, I'm actually playing it with the Japanese voices on, because this game has dual audio. But I do kind of wish they had voiced the skits. I feel like people keep saying, like, the budget, but I feel like there was enough room in the budget to dub it. Let's be real here. A lot of the work was already done. You know, when it comes to this, you know, Namco doesn't really do too much with the English version. They basically just wait until the Japanese version is done. It's like, I feel like and I'm sure they're working on stuff to like prep everything while they wait for the game to get finished, but it's very clear to me that the English staff and the Japanese staff of Namco are not connecting with each other to work on the game, even if there is some interconnectivity. Like, I understand that with name changes, they have to get approved by Namco of Japan first, which I'm glad. But anyway, I do kind of wish they had voiced skits, but they didn't. But that's okay, because this game has dual audio, something that a lot of Tales fans have been asking for. And I think it's a nice touch, because if you've played this game before, you know, playing it in Japanese, you know, it'll give you a different perspective. You know, it's kind of like watching your favorite anime dubbed first, and then you're like, oh, I remember this show. And you're just like, oh, I wonder what the Japanese version is like. So you just start watching the Japanese version. You know, and of course, I had the PS2 version before, and I've been importing the Japanese Tales games that haven't come out in English. So I've basically heard all of the Japanese cast. I think the only character I haven't heard too much of is Regal, but I've been familiar with like everyone else. So I'm playing it with the Japanese voices on, because I'm trying to kind of simulate the PS2 version, because, you know, I've already played the entire game in English. Plus, I just wanted the voice skits, which they actually kept in the Japanese version, which I'm glad they did. Yet at the same time, it's gonna make people wonder, like, wait, why was the? And I know why. I feel like part of the reason why they chose not to voice the skits is because they didn't want to give players a different experience. Because I know a lot of people are playing Symphonia for the first time with Chronicles, which definitely a good thing. But yeah, I've been playing with Japanese voices, good quality, and of course everything's already voiced in Japanese, because, you know, PS2 version came out in Japan. So speaking of dual audio, one thing that I really liked was the inclusion of the original Japanese theme songs. You know, Starry Heaven by Mizuho, Soshite Barabaduba Dabaduba, or whatever it's called, by Mizuho, and Three-Legged Race by Mizuho. I like that inclusion, even though it's not the original, it's the new version. I still liked it, and I like that Namco's giving us the Japanese theme songs. And for those who are going to bitch, yes, I know I could just download the song, but that's not the point. I feel like it has more magic and meaning to it if you actually hear it in the game. And it's really cool to hear it, and I hope they continue that for Tales of Exilia too. But I really like the new versions too. They sound really nice. You know, a PS2 theme song, Soshite Boku Blah Blah Blah, has sort of like a techno-y sound to it. I feel like Starry Heavens is like the big theme of Symphonia. It's really nice, and Three-Legged Race has a nice sound to it. But yeah, definitely glad to have these cool theme songs. Thank you, Namco, and thank you, Mizuho. Anyway, with the new stuff that they didn't translate before, I watched a little bit of it in my friend Panban Richard's stream, or Sliphon Vector, whatever you want to call him. He streamed a fair amount. He streamed all of Symphonia Chronicles, his first playthrough of it, and I got to see some of like the new content. It almost seemed to me like they were kind of just a little bit, and you'll have to forgive me, like I'm only working off of just memory and what little I saw, but it almost seemed like they were trying to go away from I don't want to say it's a mistranslation or breaking continuity or anything, but it seemed, especially considering it was between Lloyd and Zealous, so obviously Zealous is going to have a different way of talking than what most would expect maybe from Symphonia, but it didn't really seem as like religious and holy with me. Like I said, I finally feel like I understand why the dialogue in Symphonia sounds weird to me. It's because the entire game is like very religious, very holy. It has strong themes of faith. It seems to be a really big theme with Symphonia, and I feel like because of that, the game seemed very like Sunday schoolish or very churchish, very holy. And with this new translation, obviously, they've got new writers who may have not worked on Symphonia before. It could be that maybe they had forgotten how they had done the first game, and so they were just kind of translating it as well as they could. Whether or not it's better has yet to be seen from me, because again, I've only seen so much, but I felt like I could talk about enough, because the content itself is basically the same. It's still Symphonia. I'm more reviewing like the differences. So yeah, and of course with the new arts, like they try to use like most translations. The biggest issue that inconsistency I see is with Shining Bind. Kratos' Mystic Art, which is probably one of my favorites Mystic Arts of all time. Kratos says Shining Bind. The text says Holy Binds, which I would have been okay with if they had kept it as Holy Binds, but Zealous says Luminous Bind, which I know a lot of people like, but I feel like this is a perfect example of using a bigger word doesn't make it sound better. It's not about making yourself sound smart, it's about making the words fit, making the words sound good. As a writer, that's something that I try to focus on. Like, you don't want to make your characters sound like really, you don't want your characters to sound overly smart because they're using a bunch of big words, and you don't want to make your writing, it's like, oh, I'm such a good writer, look at all these nice words I'm using, oh, luminous, Leviticus, pontificate, yeah. But I feel like Shining Bind has a nice flair to it. Holy Bind had an okay flair to it, and I believe Mythos also says Shining Bind. But that's just me. But I thought it was okay. And my main issue is that they kind of kept switching around, and I feel like I don't believe this was present in the Japanese version. If you look at if you've listened to like interviews from like Funimation and stuff from Namco, you'll know that they seem to, one of their main things, they want to be as close to the Japanese as possible, and that includes not correcting their mistakes, which I don't believe this. Everyone said Shining Bind. If you go look up videos, like, everyone said Shining Bind. Granted, I consider Zealous's main Mystic Art to be Divine Judgment. I don't really like that he has Shining Bind. I understand that for Dawn of the New World they gave it to him because he's, in terms of like the way he plays, he's basically the Kratos of the game. In fact, I think he was initially designed to be a parallel to Kratos. I feel like that's one way to look at him. But yeah, kind of lost my train of thought. I'm doing this off the cuff, and this is also like the 5th or 6th time I've tried recording this. This one seems to be pretty good, so I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it for you guys. But yeah. So I feel like there was a bit of an issue with the naming stuff, because just go with Shining Bind. Like, there's no need. If they want to do Holy Binds or Luminous Bind, that's fine, but pick one. I mean, good lord. Go with Shining Bind. That's the nicest. That's the best sounding one to me. Or Solar Binds. But I I think the only other thing I can mention is there was definitely some typos in there. If you look up pictures on like Facebook or like on like Tumblr or whatnot, people will be posting different. Like there's one of Sheena where she says like I won't run away, but but there's like a backslash before it and an uppercase F, which confused me. Like I thought she might be saying if I can get away, that is, or something. But then like I looked at it like, oh no, she's just saying I won't run away or something. So there's definitely some typos, and the text, from what I understand, is the European version. I feel like this is sort of the end of a trend of like Namco primarily using the European version as like the official international version. From what I've seen, though, it's still an Americanized version. So I mean, obviously the script is in English, and in the North American version, there's no other language options. I think in the European version there is, but there's still just like English and Japanese voices, which I play in Japanese. The only other thing I can think of would be they added the battle quotes at the end, which you can't really seem to turn them off, which is okay, because in Symphonia I feel like they look fine. You know, they're just like little blocks of gray that come up and then the text shows up, and I feel like that's the best way to do it. It's quick and then it goes away, and I like that. And Dawn of the New World, and from what I've heard, it's a carryover from the European version, because the version they used for this HD re-release was the European version, so the new content comes from there. But in Dawn of the New World, it's just like a fade of blue with the text comes up, and I don't really like that. Like I think the blue is fine, but I kind of wish it was just like a box that just kind of almost like it feels like it doesn't really fit in. I kind of like that. I prefer that, because then I feel like they're not trying to blend it in, because I prefer soft subs over hard subs, if that makes any sense. I want the subtitles to look like they don't belong there, and they're there to help someone else. That's the way I think. That's the way I like my subtitles, personally. I know in the past I've talked about how annoying yellow subtitles are, but now I kind of like them. I actually kind of prefer them to white subtitles. But anywho, with Dawn, I haven't played too much of it. Since it's from the same generation as the PS3, I feel like up-resing it is not necessarily as hard. The graphics, I feel like with the Wii, it has HD support, like component HD support. So I feel like the game was still like designed in like an HD kind of way. It's just that like most people didn't output it that way or whatever. And so I feel like switching it over to the PS3 in like real HD was a lot easier. And controller, from what I understand, a lot of people didn't like the controller. From what I understand, the guard button, which is square, was also the free run, which I'd have to go back and play Dawn of the New World, because I don't remember it being that way. I honestly don't remember. It kind of I feel like I can kind of understand that, though, because I feel like the placement of the nunchuck, or at least my placement of it, because I'm right-handed, so I put the control stick in the left hand, I remember it being there, but I can't remember. And at the same time, like, even if that's the case, I understand that they don't want to mess too much with the game mechanics, but if you're switching platforms and switching control schemes completely, like, it's not like with Graces where, you know, you could use the classic controller and the overall, like, button scheme, like, is the same, like it's still like the diamond, you know, with the two control sticks and the bumpers and triggers and the D-pad and the control sticks and the start and select and the home button. You know, it's like it. Even though they're all like different styles and different like buttons, like with Xbox it's start and back, PlayStation it's start and select, and now with the Nintendo it's plus and minus. Like, it's still like the same general like controller type, if that makes sense. It's like, I feel like it'd be much easier to port games around and like set up controls much easier than it would be going from like PlayStation Move to the Xbox controller, for example. And I feel like, you know, but basically I feel like with Graces, like, they obviously just took like the Wii Classic Controller control scheme and just ported it over to PlayStation 3. It really wasn't that hard. I would imagine. And it definitely feels like they just like ported over the control scheme. I think I've talked about it in my Races F Final Thought, which I still need to make the Rebirth one and the Exilium one, actually. But with Dawn of the New World, I feel like since they're switching control schemes altogether, like, I know that with the Wiimote and Nunchuck, like, you didn't have to, like, swing the controller around. Like, it basically just played like a regular game. It's just that the controller felt different because you're not using a standard controller. You're using a motion controller. But it still played like a regular game. And I praised Dawn of the New World of that because I feel like it used the Wiimote in the best way possible. It didn't treat it like a gimmick. It treated it like a fucking game controller. Though classic controller support would have been nice. And if they'd used classic controller support on that game, I feel like porting it over to the PlayStation 3 would have been a lot easier. So I understand that that it's definitely difficult, but I feel like since you're switching control schemes and platforms, and basically you're just switching to a different, it's like moving to a different country, really, in a way. I feel like fixing up the controls a little bit to make it more like, you know, a controller Tales game might have been a better thing, especially considering you've got more controls, but more buttons to work with. But that's just me, and I'm going to be playing it, obviously, at some point, probably with the Japanese voices. I don't know if... I assume they still make it to where you have to have Emil or Marta in your party, and you can't, like, switch them out. I'll have to play that soon. I'm still working on Symphonia 1. I want to do Symphonia 1 first, because I was originally going to use the PS2 version as sort of like the definitive version I would play, like, whenever I'm with friends, or if I just want to play Symphonia for a little bit, I'd probably go to the PS2 version. Now it's going to be the PS3 version. I'm honestly kind of a little annoyed with Namco, because I friggin' bought the PS2 version, so I have that, but now there's no real point. It's just a game in Japanese, like complete Japanese, no English text or anything. I know there's a patch, but no patch. But I'm not saying that there's no patch, saying that I don't want to do the patch. But now that Symphonia Chronicles is out with the Japanese voices, the PS2 version, the new content, like I want the samurai costume for Kratos, like the yukata, like the white and purple yukata. I do want that costume. And of course there's the new Tails costumes, like, you know, the Guy costume for Lloyd, the Luger costume for Kratos, and whatnot, and they look nice. Though obviously, since it's an older Tales game, they're still using the title mechanic, and I know they don't give. Personally, I like that though, because I feel like I didn't like using the costumes because I didn't want to have to like worry about like my stats getting shifted to like a different type. Because I don't remember if the titles with the stats, if they just increase or decrease the stat just if you're using that title, or if it changes like how much points you get for that certain stat with each level up. I don't remember, but the only other thing I can think of besides talking about everything, I mean, I guess I never did finish my thought. I like the costumes, but I guess the only other thing I can think of would be playing this game again is giving me some different perspective of, like, I feel like now that I've kind of got my different, like, new, I'm finally kind of in like my writer mode. Writing is what I want to do, so I feel like I look at stories a little differently than I used to, and because of that, I feel like I'm starting to notice things. Also, just because, you know, I've played Symphonia before, so with Symphonia 1, one thing I've noticed about Kratos, I feel like, you know, I know a lot of people don't really like Kratos, but I feel like I'm starting to kind of, I mean, he's my favorite. He's one of my favorite characters, and I see him as sort of like the father figure of the Tales series as far as the crossovers are concerned. But I feel like like they give little scenes showing like he's actually trying to be a dad. Like, it's pretty obvious if you've played Symphonia. It's pretty obvious once you've played Symphonia. It's pretty obvious to know like he knew that Lloyd was his son from the beginning, and he was kind of like planning stuff. He had like these little plans. Like, even if he was kind of blindly following mythos, he's a lot like Alvin in that way, or Alvin's like him, however you want to look at it. And that, you know, he's a conflicted character, but at the same time, I feel like Kratos has done a little bit better because he's not just constantly going back and forth all the time and just being really confused. I feel like with Kratos, he's genuinely trying to be a good dad to Lloyd while he's traveling with them. I noticed this specifically in the scene with him and Triet, or tree at the desert place. It's when Lloyd goes out to follow Kratos outside, and they have a little talky talk outside, and Lloyd's like, "Do you like animals?" And he's like,
No, I don't like fucking animals, you piece of shit.
he doesn't actually say that, but they have a little talk, and he just kind of looks at Lloyd, and I feel like the reason why he looks at Lloyd is because he recognizes that he's his son. It probably, even seeing his son is like 17 years old, and he's like old, so he's seen a lot of kids, but seeing his own son and seeing himself in his son, because obviously genes and whatnot, he just can't help but look. Like, my dad does the same thing. He looks at me too sometimes, but not in a gay way or anything, or at least I hope not. But yeah, like, so I feel like because my dad does that, I feel like, okay, this is what Kratos is doing here. And he keeps saying, "Don't die, Lloyd." It's because he wants, I think the golden clip on Richard's Tales Marathon stream, which is getting close to ending. I think I'm recording this on Friday. I don't know when it'll come out. Probably Saturday. But he wants Lloyd to stay alive so he can put his plan to action, because he feels like Lloyd can help him. And then he keeps saying, like, your sword skills are not very good. And then he keeps saying, well, I can train. He wants to spend time with his son. That's very, very, very clear to me. I feel like that's probably the clearest thing that Symphonia has done. I know Symphonia likes to be like, oh wait, can it be? Oh, what's that? Oh, nothing. It's like, oh no, it's nothing. That famous Tales line that too many fucking characters do. I'm so glad Hubert fixed that in Graces. So I feel like with Symphonia, I've got a new perspective on Kratos a little bit, and I feel like I have more ammo to defend himself, to defend his character. But yeah, and of course I like other characters. I've gotten to where I really like Lloyd. Zealous is funny. Persea, I don't really hate characters. That's kind of hard for me to do. But yeah. Overall, I think this game, while a little rough, is definitely a good version to get. If you don't like the inconsistent like voice quality from like the old clips and the new clips for like the new dialogue, and if you don't like the voices, the skits not being voiced, probably switch to the Japanese version. Namco was nice enough to give us that option, and I'm glad they did. And I know with Hearts it's going to be Japanese voices only. A tad unfortunate for a brand new game, but I can at least understand for this one. And I feel like with this, it'll definitely pave the way for more Tales games getting dual audio, at least. I don't think Exilia 2 is, or at least not yet. But yeah. That's all my thoughts about Tales Symphonia Chronicles. So yeah, this is Flamsaron, aka YouTube Sasuke, signing out. See you later. You didn't think I was going to forget, did ya? Did ya? Before I go, I just wanted to say that not only is it the 10th anniversary of Tales Symphonia, but it's also the 10th anniversary of Mizuho. And like I said in the beginning and in the description, you should definitely, I'm glad you stuck around until the end to see this. But, it's been 10 years since I joined Mizuho, and, I talked about it on this channel a little bit. It's mainly we're just mainly like a private group. We're getting more people, and of course Richard is doing his Tales of Marathon stream, and of course there's the podcast and the Mizuho channel, which... I hope to do more stuff. I wrote like a giant, like 4-page, like thing, testimonial, if you will, about the BBS and shared it with everyone. That was cool. And like, it's really cool to me that I've been with this group for like 10 years and I've got to see them all grow. It's interesting to see how we have all changed. And I think back to the old days when like we really only knew about Symphonia, but then like some of us started to get more into the Tale series, and some of us had already played. Like, I knew some people were like talking about like other Tales games, but then like the majority of us had only played Symphonia, and of course I wanted to play the others, and so that ship has already sailed. So I guess that means I've been a Tales fan for 10 years as well. So yeah, Tales series, definitely probably my favorite video game series. I think honestly, it's if not my favorite, it's definitely up there. It's definitely it's my favorite. Because everything else competing with it is either not a video game franchise, or isn't really consistent enough to really compete with it, or isn't big enough to really compete with it. But yeah, I've got some big plans for the in terms of videos and scripts and whatnot. I'm not going to say anything But I do want to make like a Tales importing guide. I should probably just make like a collecting and importing guide in general. Like if I ever do one of those, that'll definitely go here. But if I do a Tales importing guide, that's gonna probably go on the Mizuho channel. But yeah, thanks for sticking with me all these 10 years, Mizuho community. You know who you are, and here's to another 10 years. Okay, for realsies though. Bye.